The Seine carried everything: prayers, waste, and death. In the summer of 1348, a smell arrived from the east and settled over Paris like a second sky, heavier, darker, and lethal. Paris, 1348. The Black Death is already in Marseille, already in Lyon, moving north through the Rhône Valley at the pace of a trading cart. And the city that called itself the center of Christendom is still lighting candles in Notre Dame and telling itself it will be spared. It will not be spared. The river was the problem and the reason for everything. It brought the city its food, its commerce, its identity, and it received in return the contents of every cesspit on every street between the Ile de la Cité and the city walls, carrying it all downstream to the villages that drew their drinking water from the same slow and indifferent current. The tanner on the Rue de la Boucherie worked his hides in vats of urine and excrement, the chemical process unchanged for centuries, the smell on hot days reaching the cathedral 2 streets away, mixing with the incense the cannons burned specifically to counteract it, and never managing to do so. The butchers of the Grand Châtelet slaughtered in the open street and let the blood run into the drainage channels, which flowed when it rained and stood still when it did not, the pooled mixture absorbing into the mud that everyone walked through and nobody acknowledged out loud or in writing. The physician at the Hôtel Dieu, the city's oldest hospital, built on the banks of the Seine and receiving the dying from every quarter of Paris around the clock, understood that his patients arrived already too far gone, that the distance between the first symptom and the last breath in the summer of 1348 was measured in days rather than weeks. He recommended fumigation with burning herbs, bloodletting to restore humoral balance, and prayer directed toward whichever saint was currently associated with pestilence. He wrote his recommendations in Latin. His patients died in French. None of it worked. The Black Death took between 30 and 40% of Paris in that first wave, a number so large the city lacked the living to properly bury the dead. The pits at the Saint-Innocent cemetery filled faster than they could be dug, and the smell from the cemetery joined the smell from the river, and Paris became, for the full duration of that summer, a city that smelled entirely of its own ending. Paris survived the Black Death the way cities survive catastrophes, by continuing, by filling the empty houses with new inhabitants, by insisting the season of death had been an aberration rather than a pattern that would repeat itself with reliability and precision. It was a pattern. The plague returned in 1360, in 1374, in 1400, in 1418. Each wave killed thousands and left behind empty rooms that filled again with the next ship's worth of arrivals. Each wave changed nothing about the conditions that made the killing possible. By the 17th century, Paris had grown to 500,000 people, pressed inside a street plan designed for 50,000, and the cesspit problem had become something that royal edicts addressed every decade, and that nobody in any position of authority ever meaningfully solved in all that time. The cesspits beneath the houses of the Marais and Saint-Antoine quarters were emptied nocturnally, by law, only at night. The workers were called Vidangeurs. They descended into the pits with no light except what they carried. They filled barrels in the dark. They loaded those barrels onto carts and drove them to fields outside the city walls before the first light reached the streets. Then they returned the following week and did it again. This system functioned imperfectly in the best conditions. After heavy rain, the pits overflowed into the basements, then into the streets. The distinction between drinking water and waste became a matter of proximity rather than kind. The philosopher and the pauper drank from the same contaminated ground. The Seine received contributions from every arrondissement with perfect impartiality and no capacity for shame. The population density of central Paris in 1750 was among the highest ever recorded in a European city. Streets so narrow in the oldest quarters that neighbors on upper floors could lean from their windows and shake hands across the gap, sunlight never reaching the pavement below from October through March. In these streets, tuberculosis was not a visitation. It was a permanent resident, as reliable as winter, as patient as the stones it moved through. The working woman who took in washing for the households of the Faubourg Saint-Germain carried her bundles through streets the wealthy crossed only by carriage, absorbing into her lungs over the years the particular air of the oldest and most crowded quarters of Paris. She did not name what was happening to her. She sewed until the light failed, breathed what the street offered, and outlasted most of her neighbors by learning to live very carefully inside a city that was never designed for her survival. The cholera of 1832 arrived in Paris on March 26th, and within a week the city understood that everything it had faced before, the typhus, the tuberculosis, the recurring fevers of summer, had been slow enough to allow the illusion of individual agency. Cholera offered no such illusion. The incubation was hours. The progression from first symptom to death could be completed within a single day in the same room, while the family watched and the doctor wrote down what he believed was the cause. He believed it was the smell. In 1832, Paris operated on Miasma Theory, the conviction that disease did not travel through water or contact, but through foul air itself, through the emanations of rotting matter rising from the river and the streets below. The smell was not a symptom. The smell was the disease. If you breathed the air of the poor quarters of Paris, you breathed death. This was the diagnosis. This was the framework inside which every physician in the city, every public health official, every family that could afford to move to higher ground was making decisions. The smell rising from the Seine on warm evenings was not just unpleasant, it was, in the medicine of the time, a direct sentence. The theory was wrong about the mechanism. It was accidentally correct about the location. The neighborhoods that smelled worst were also the neighborhoods where the water was most contaminated, and so some interventions born from the wrong diagnosis still landed in the right place. The prefect Rambuteau ordered the streets washed with water. The water came from the Seine. The Seine contained the cholera. The washing distributed it further across the surfaces children played on, and vendors worked beside from dawn to dusk. 18,000 people died in Paris in that epidemic. The dead were removed at night in closed carts to prevent panic. The carts were heard but not seen, wheels grinding on cobblestone in the dark. And that sound became the signature of that spring in the memory of everyone who survived it. The poor quarters, the Ile de la Cité, the Faubourg Saint-Marcel, died at twice the rate of the wealthy arrondissement. The disparity had a clear explanation and received none. Flora Tristan walked through the Saint-Antoine quarter 3 days after the peak and recorded what she found. Houses where every adult had died, children sitting in dark rooms with no food and no understanding of what had happened around them. If this glimpse into their forgotten streets moves you, leave a like to keep their story alive. The transformation of Paris came not from compassion, but from fear. The fear of a different kind of epidemic, the memory of the barricades of 1830, the certainty of the prefect Georges Eugène Haussmann and his emperor Napoleon III that the narrow streets of the old city were as dangerous politically as they were medically. Between 1853 and 1870, Haussmann demolished 40,000 buildings and displaced 300,000 people. The poor, the artisans, the workers whose families had survived the plague years and the cholera epidemic in these same streets for generations. He replaced their quarters with the broad boulevards, the uniform stone facades, the regulated geometry that defines the Paris tourists photograph today. A city of light built on the cleared ground of the one that had existed before it, raised over the bones of those who had made it what it was. The old streets of the Ile de la Cité, where the plague had concentrated in 1348 and the cholera had killed at double the citywide rate in 1832, were cleared entirely and without sentiment. The island became an administrative center, the Palais de Justice, the Préfecture de Police, presiding over a neighborhood that no longer held a single resident. The displaced poor moved east and north to Belleville and Ménilmontant, where they rebuilt the same density in new buildings on cheaper ground, the same overcrowding in cheaper materials, the same distance from clean water that was being installed at that very moment in the quarters they had just been required to vacate. Haussmann also built a new sewer system beneath the new boulevards, extending eventually to nearly 600 kilometers, making Paris the most comprehensively sewered city in Europe by 1870. The irony was precise and did not require elaboration. The infrastructure that would finally reduce disease mortality in Paris was installed beneath streets cleared from the neighborhoods where that mortality had historically been highest. after the people who survived those neighborhoods were relocated to places without sewers. The surgeon, Louis-René Villermé, had mapped this geography of death with statistical precision in his 1826 study, correlating mortality rates with income levels across the Paris arrondissements and producing numbers so consistent and so damning that they constituted a proof poverty, not foul air, was the operative vector of death in this city. The city ignored this finding for 4 decades and then acted on it by moving the poor somewhere else. Subscribe to Memories Reanimated to keep walking these streets with us. By 1900, the infant mortality rate in Paris had fallen to levels incomprehensible to the physician at the Hôtel Dieu, who watched the Black Death move through his wards in 1348, or to the families in the Saint-Antoine quarter who had heard the cholera carts on the cobblestones in the spring of 1832. Clean water arrived through cast-iron pipes laid beneath the new boulevards. The cesspits were sealed. The Vidangeurs disappeared into history, replaced by an underground network so extensive that tours of the sewers became a Parisian attraction, visitors paying to walk through the tunnels that now carried away what had once pooled in the basements above. The washerwomen who had worked the banks of the Seine moved to laundries with heated water and tiled floors, and the river itself, freed from the contributions of 500,000 cesspits, began the long process of becoming what appeared in the paintings of the Impressionists: silver, reflective, recreational, indifferent to everything the previous centuries had asked it to carry. The bodies from the Saints Innocents Cemetery had been disinterred in 1786 and moved to the ossuary beneath the city. The bones of 6 million people arranged in the stone galleries of the old limestone quarries that Paris had been built from. The dead and the foundations of the living city sharing the same underground space as they always had, without ceremony. Tourists visit the catacombs today and photograph the skulls and find them beautiful in the way arranged death is always beautiful when sufficiently old, organized, and separated from the living moment that produced it. The streets above are clean, well-lit, and served by a metro running beneath the bones of everyone who died of plague and cholera and tuberculosis in the centuries when the city either did not know how to keep them alive or knew and chose not to. Stand on the Ile de la Cité on a Tuesday morning. Tourists photograph Notre Dame. A couple argues near the flower market. The Seine moves past the same embankment it has moved past for 2,000 years, and the city offers no visible evidence of what it cost to become what it is. The evidence is in the bones below, in the water that runs clean from the tap, in the absence of the smell. They held, they built, they became. Join Memories Reanimated, subscribe to keep these stories alive, and tell us in the comments, which city's forgotten history do you want us to explore next?